Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are finishing up Journal Collection number 54, dating from the year 1863, when the author was 60 years old. We will start in the middle of a run of thoughts that Emerson is having, not in any particular date, but the subject is transubstantiation. Every one would be poet if his intellectual digestion were perfect, if the grass and carrots passed through all four stomachs and became pure milk. But in Crumplehorn's cream there is sometimes a tang of turnip, and in the gay pictures of the orator a reminder now and then of autobiography, starring eyes of duns or schoolmasters or cousins or critics who have tormented him far on this side of heaven. I could guess his griefs better from his poetry than from the polite biography which introduces the book. Concentration indicates control of thoughts, holding them as lanthorns to light each other and the main fact. A guiding star to the arrangement and use of facts is in your leading thought. In college, it is complained money and the vulgar respectability have the same ascendant as in the city. What remedy? There is but one, namely the arrival of genius, which instantly takes the lead and makes the fashion. At Cambridge, Edward Everett, Buckminster, John Everett, Lee and Edward, and Charles Emerson, each in their turn gave vogue to literary taste and eloquence in their classes. Thoreau writes in his journal, Herndon says of the Amazon country, there is wanting an industrious and active population who know what the comforts of life are, and who have artificial wants to draw out the great resources of the country. But what are the artificial wants of the great resources of a country? Surely not the love of luxuries, like the tobacco and slaves of his native Virginia, or that fertility of soil which produces these. The chief want is ever a life of deep experiences, that is, character, which alone draws out great resources of nature. When our wants cease to be chiefly superficial and trivial, which is commonly meant by artificial, and begin to be wants of character, then the great resources of a country are taxed and drawn out, and the result, the staple production, is poetry. It is claimed for the clergy that it is the planting of a qualified man in every town whose whole business is to do good in every form. Do not look sourly at the club which does not choose you. It is impossible to extricate oneself from the questions in which our age is involved. You can no more keep out of politics than out of the frost. Nature says to the American, I understand mensuration and numbers. I have measured out to you by weight and tally the powers you need. Eliot Cabot's paper on art has given emphasis to one point among others, that people only see what they are prepared to see. Thus, who sees birds except the hunter or the ornithologist? How difficult it is to me to see certain particulars in the dress of people with whom I sit for hours, and after I had wished to know what sort of waistcoat or coat or shirt collar or neckcloth they wore. I have gone to many dinners and parties with instructions from home and with my own wish to see the dress of the men, and can never remember to look for it. Who teaches manners of majesty, of frankness, of grace, of humility? Who but the adoring aunts and cousins that surround a young child? I cannot read of Madame Recamier without thinking of Anna Ward. I remember Haydn's measure of the beauty of a picture in the shop window was the regard of the poor Italians in the street. Individuality. There are people whose strong individuality traverses, like the Arethusa fountain, the bitter waters of the sea, and arrives pure. We magnify our national customs and fancy the barriers of the age and the nationality invincible. But at any time a new man will re-establish France, or feudal England, or ancient Greece, and whatever is the most exceptional in its genius and practice, through all his relations in Puritan Boston. It is in vain to murmur at Bonaparte or Goethe or Carlyle. They conquer for themselves an absolute allowance, which, however, does not extend beyond themselves or become hereditary, though elsewhere it may be or has been the custom of a country. It is with difficulty that we want ourselves in the language of the Eastern poets, and the melodramatic life, as if one should go down to Lewis's wharf and find an ivory boat and a pink sea. He thinks he is at the opera, as for example in the Chinese Two Fair Cousins. Courage. A political gentleman wheeled a barrel of apples in a wheelbarrow from Newburyport to Boston, and through the city to the Tremont House, in obedience to a bet on the election he had made with the boarder of that hotel. It cost courage to undertake and perform it, but the less on account of the eclat, and the last miles were done with attendance of drum and trumpet. Thoreau thought none of his acquaintances dare walk with a patch on the knee of his trousers to the Concord post office. What young lady in Boston would go into Washington Street with a tin pail? Yes, but every sensible woman would carry a pail to the fire, and every man would stick on a patch if wounded or freezing. Greatness. You must have a source higher than your tap. Wedgwood bravely took Flaxman to counsel, and drew on Etruria in England. You must be idealists, as Greeks were and still give you the law, as Judea was, as Egypt was, as Romans were. Life is ideal. Death is to break up our styles. This the use of war, to shatter your porcelain dolls, to break up in a nation Chinese conservatism, death and life. A thought makes solitude in a crowd. The lover goes not into the street where the silver feet are, but into the forest. We are coming, thanks to the war, to a nationality. Put down your foot and say to England, I know your merits, and have paid them in the past to the homage of ignoring your faults. I see them still. But it is time to say the whole truth, that you have failed in an Olympian hour, that when the occasion of magnanimity arrived, you had it not, that you have lost character. Besides, your insularity, your inches, are conspicuous, and they are not to count against miles. When it comes to divide an estate, the politest men quarrel. Justice is above your aim, you are self-condemned. When the merchant reads the broker's stock list, if his own shares are depreciated, he does not less read with pleasure the firmness of the other quotations as indicating the soundness and integrity of the community, which give value to all property, and his withal. When our young officers come back from the army on a 40 days' furlough, they find apathy and opposition in cities. Washington and Cromwell, one using a moral, the other a revolutionary policy. The government of Algiers and of Turkey is, though it lasts for ages, revolutionary. If we continued in Boston to throw tea into the bay at pleasure, that were revolutionary. But our revolution was in the interest of the moral or anti-revolutionary. Slavery is Algiers or perpetual revolution, society upside down, head over heels, and man eating his breakfast with pistols by his plate. It is man degraded to cat and dog, and society has come to an end, and all gentlemen die out. Thus, a violent conservatism is more revolutionary than abolition or freedom of speech and of press. 'Tis like shuttering your window when you have lighted a pan of coals in the unchimneyed apartment. There are degrees and limits. A man may make a capital speech in Exeter Hall, and yet not dictate to the English throne. Everybody likes a pronounced character. A man who makes a speech and does not wish to hurt anybody can be unheard without loss. In England, which is a better organized public than any other, they have a rapid ticketing of each man, and a rapid toleration of him when so ticketed. Holyoake and Urquhart and O'Connell and Smith O'Brien, but nobody there or here likes a whiffler or a trimmer. November. Education. Who does not teach his child a trade or profession brings him up to steal, says the Persians. Eloquence. And then there's a French quotation, the world, it is an echo. In speaking of England, I lay out of question the truly cultivated class. They exist in England as in France, in Germany, in America, in Italy, and they are like Christians or poets or chemists existing for each other across all possible nationalities, strangers to their people and brothers to you. I lay them out of question. They are sane men as far removed as from the bluster and mendacity of the London Times and the shop tone of Liverpool. They, like us, wish to be exactly informed, and to speak and act for the public good and not for party. Shall we go to war with England for Punch's picture, or for the opinion of the drunken Lord S? Having penetrated the people and known their unworthiness, we can well cease to respect their opinion, even their contempt, and not go to war at our disadvantage for the avoiding of this. Who are they that they should despise? These people who cringe before Gortschakoff and Napoleon. Let us remember the wise remark of General Scott. Resentment is a bad basis for a campaign. I am not sure of the wisdom of Burke's saying, contempt is not a thing to be despised. Originality. A well-read man can always find the opinion and thesis of a new writer, be he who he will, and however original already printed in an old book. Thus Madame du Dessord had Carlyle's horror at eloquence. Every new writer is only a new crater of an old volcano. Then there is a French quotation of Cicero. What are the fine verses of Solon to the effect that the orator has not the harmony of thought and speech until from 42 to 46 years of age? Saint Beuve, Cosseries, Volume 1. Then there is an untranslated quotation from Ovid. And then another quotation which ends with, "This is the Trinity which makes the creed and the cultus of society." Lincoln. We must accept the results of universal suffrage, and not try to make it appear that we can elect fine gentlemen. We shall have coarse men with a fair chance of worth and manly ability, but not polite men, not men to please the English or French. You cannot refine Mr. Lincoln's taste, extend his horizon, or clear his judgment. He will not walk dignifiedly through the traditional part of the President of America, but will pop out his head at each railroad station and make a little speech, and get into an argument with Squire A and Judge B. He will write letters to Horace Greeley and any editor or reporter or saucy party committee that writes to him, and cheapen himself. But this we must be ready for, and let the clown appear, and hug ourselves that we are well off, if we have not good nature, honest meaning, and fidelity to public interest, with bad manners, instead of an elegant roue and malignant self-seeker. If our brothers or children are killed in the battle, we owe to them the same courage and self-renunciation in bearing well their death, which they showed us in sacrificing themselves. They who come today to his funeral, the soldiers, tomorrow will tread on his warpath and show to his slayers the way to death. Beauty. For the eye altering alters all. Blake. In seeing the other day, I did not like it that she appeared rather to endure her beauty than to animate or create it. Then there's an untranslated French quotation. You are the pickets. The difference between you and your enemies is eternal. It is the difference of motive. Your action is to build, and their action is to destroy. Yours to protect and to establish the rights of men, and theirs to crush them. Machiavelli himself said, "'Tis not the violence which repairs, but the violence which destroys, that is to be blamed." Friendship. Chacun a son goût. Frasor says of his youth, "I loved all those who loved dogs and birds." Homme amoureux was in that age equivalent to homme comme il faut. Classes. It makes a great difference whether a man lives with his face or his back to the window. Leasts. Quote-unquote trifles is a very convertible word. Your trifles are my gods. The child's soap bubbles are Newton's problems. Of Wordsworth's poem, To H.C., 6 years old, William Blake writes, This is all in the highest degree imaginative and equal to any poet, but not superior. I cannot think that real poets have any competition. None are greatest in the kingdom of heaven. It is so in poetry. By the way, this is the first that I can remember of Emerson citing William Blake, which is just interesting to me on a personal note because I really like William Blake. We do not clearly see what shall be or how religion and enthusiasm are to come to us Americans, which we sorely need. For the imported religions are used up, and we want power to drive the ponderous state. Incredulity verges on despair. We think we can defy any crisis, any teacher, any providence to reproduce for us the enthusiasm of Greece after the Persian invasion, the enthusiasm for beauty, or that of Europe in the early Christianity and later in the Crusades, and in the ages when plainly mankind expected that the world was shortly coming to an end, or the fire of Arabia in Islamism, or the power and terror of France in 1789. We can see that the Constitution and law in America must be written on ethical principles, so that the entire power of the spiritual world can be enlisted to hold the loyalty of the citizen. See how the Greeks wrote their metaphysics, and the names and attributes of their gods: Apollo for genius, Themis for ethics, Mercury for eloquence, Muses for poetry, Daedalus for art, Parse for fate, Mnemosyne for memory, Metis for counsel, Prometheus forethought, Epimetheus afterthought, Jove for supreme reason, Comus and Momus and Silenus and Graces for laughter and wit. My humorous friend told me that old age was cheap. Time drew out his teeth gratis, and a suction plate would last him as long as he lived. He does not go to the hairdresser, for time cut off his hair, and he had lived so long and bought so many clothes that he should not need to buy any more. In October, Sumner was elected to the Saturdayarians, otherwise known as the Saturday Club. In that country, a peculiarity is that after 60 years a certain mist or dimness, a sort of autumnal haze, settled on the figure, veiling especially all decays. Gradually, year by year, the outline became indistinct, and the halo gayer and brighter. At last there was only left a sense of presence, and the virtue of personality, as if Gyges never turned his ring again. It was an immense and social convenience. Poetry and prose. In poetry, nature bears the whole expense. In prose, there must be concatenation, a mass of facts, and a method. 'Tis very costly, only a capitalist can take hold of it. But in poetry, the mere enumeration of natural objects suffices. Nay, Tennyson is a poet because he has said, "The stammering thunder," or "the wrinkled sea beneath him crawls," and Longfellow, "the plunging wave." Sadi. The trait which most characterizes Sadi, and has almost made his name a synonym for the quality, is cheerfulness. His name means fortunate, and the quality betrays a well-constituted or healthy man. All the anecdotes intimate a happy soul to which victory is habitual, easily shedding mishaps, and with sensibility to pleasure and power of resources against pain. Time is short, but always long enough for the finest trait of courtesy. Cheerfulness, flowing from the vision of the laws that control the world, and from the wise bounty of his own heart. Then again, this his genius, this his poet's robe and garland, beauty in the world and an answering beauty in his own artistic skill. The beauty that he sees he can create. Sadi's whole power lies in sweet words. Let this remain. I care not what is taken. The human race is interested in Sadi, whilst the cynical tone of Byron, which helps nobody, only owes to his genuine talent for melodious expression its lingering longevity. Sadi is the poet of friendship, of love, of heroism, self-devotion, joy, bounty, serenity, and of the divine providence. Louis XI, Comines tells us, none so humble in word and dress. And then there's a French quotation, untranslated. How we turn our passions to account. It is not Arnault, it is not Spears, it is French novels that teach us French, and German that teaches us German. The passions rush us through the resistance of grammar and strange vocabulary, and facility being once obtained, the feebler appetite of taste and love of knowledge suffice to habituate us in new land. What an element in our social fabric is money and the currency, war shows us fast enough. You have bought long mortgages on perfect security. You have bought City of Bostons or Massachusetts 5 or 6s or annuities for 60 years. But specie currency stops, and you are paid in paper. How fares it at this moment with annuitants in Richmond? But you have been wiser than your whole generation, and have stipulated to be paid in gold. But gold, it seems, through the immense yield of the mines, depreciated in value one half, so I read in Gilbraith. The only currency that is always sterling is personal values, courage, self-command, manners, wit, learning, and geometry. Saudi. The poet is always awaited by the people. He has only the overdose of that quality whereof they have the underdose. We do not know them until they show their taste by their enthusiastic welcome of his genius. A foreign criticism might easily affect to make a little account of him, unless their applauses showed the high historic importance of his powers. In these songs and elegies break into the light the national mind of the Persians and Arabians. These monotonies which we accuse our own. A new landscape, new costume, new religion, new manners and customs, under which humanity nestles very comfortably at Shiraz and Mecca with good appetite, and with moral and intellectual results that correspond point for point with ours at London and New York. It needs in every sense a free translation, just as they attribute to the east wind what we say of the west. Every age has its true religion, and its mythology. In every company in which a poem is read, you may be sure a part hear the exoteric and part the esoteric sense. Every city has its rival city, its ridiculous suburb, its old times, and its joke. Boston has Hull. All are but parts of one majestic whole, and its banter with New York journalism. Boutwell said to me the other day, "It makes no difference whether we gain or lose a battle, except the loss of valuable lives. We gain the advantage from month to month." There has been no example like ours of the march of a good cause as by gravitation, or rather by specific levity against particular defeats. It is like the progress of health and sleep. You have removed the causes of disease, and one of them is your restless doing, and all mends of itself. It is like the replacement of the dislocated bone as soon as you have removed the obstruction. The vanity of no man is gratified. The abolitionist would so willingly put in his claim. The sublime God puts him back into the same category of egotism with the copperhead. I remember when I feared, what one still newly escaped shudders to think of, that a little more success, a wiser choice of candidates by the Southern party, say of Jefferson Davis instead of Pierce or Buchanan, had enabled them by a coup d'etat to have strained the whole organism of the government to the behoof of slavery, to have insisted by all the courts, marshals, and armies and navy of the Union on carrying into effect a right of transit with slaves from state to state. It had then only been necessary for rich Democrats in New York, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut to buy slaves, and it is not easy to see how the ardent abolitionists, always a minority hated by the rich class, could have successfully resisted. The effect, however, would have been to put the onus of resistance on the North, and at last the North would have seceded. We had been the rebels, and would have had the like difficulty to put our states into secession as the Southerners had. "These are matters of arrangement, not of legal value," said the broker. At the town meeting one is impressed with the accumulated virility of the 4 or 5 men, Haywood, Fay, Brooks, Hoare, who speak so well to the point, and so easily handle the affairs of their town, only 4 last night, and all so good that they would have satisfied me, had it been in Boston or in Washington. The speech of Judge Hoare was perfect, and to that handful of people who heartily applauded it. When a good man rises in the cold and malicious assembly, you think, well, it would be more prudent to be silent. Why not rest on a good past? Nobody doubts your talent and power, and for the present business we know all about it, and are tired of being pushed into patriotism by people who stay at home. But he, taking no counsel of past things, but only of the inspiration of his today's feelings, surprises them with his tidings, his better knowledge, his larger view, his steady gaze at the new and future event, whereof they had no thought, and they are interested like so many children, and carried off out of all recollection of their malignant nonsense, and he gains his victory by prophecy, where they expected repetition. He knew beforehand that they were looking behind, and that he was looking ahead, and therefore it was wise to speak. What a godsend are these people to a town, and the judge, what a faculty! He is put together like a Waltham watch, or like a locomotive just finished from the Tredegar works. Boston. The Boston of Franklin, Adams, Otis, Quincy, Warren, of Wendell Phillips, of Jonathan Phillips, of Edward Everett, of Horatio Greenough, of Alston, of Brook Farm, of Edward Taylor, of Daniel Webster, Samuel, Dexter, Buckminster, Channing, Greenwood, of Charles Sprague, of Starr King, of Billings, the architect, of Mrs. Julia Howe, Margaret Fuller, of a class of forgotten but wonderful young men, burning too fast to live long, but who marked not less the powers of the air and soil. John Everett, Clark, Harris the Orientalist, Edward Lowell, Edward and Charles Emerson, Fiske, who wrote his Greek grammar in his bed, not having clothes enough, the Boston of Beecher, Horace Mann, Parker, of Sumner, Lowell, Holmes, Agassiz, Longfellow, Pierce, Dana, Ward, Hoare, Hunt, Henry James, Peter Hunt, Newcomb. The Boston which animates other souls born of it, or adopted spiritually into it, and in all quarters of their dispersion, drawing inspiration from it. Furness, Beecher, Channing, Fremont, even Bryant, Greeley. Nay, the influences are so wide, and the names crowd on me so fast, that I must take the Boston Directory or the National Census to exhaust them. The neighborhood of Thanksgiving Day makes me look at our cousins of New York with a kinder eye, and I remember that the Germans say that Vienna is the first German city, Berlin the second, and New York the third, and I shall say that New York is the second city of Bostonians, and whenever we shall so far have inoculated that center of nations by our crowding immigration from New England, that they shall give a Republican vote, I will concede that it is the first. Editor's note. In earlier journals, Mr. Emerson's lifelong friend, George P. Bradford, has been mentioned, a gentle, sensitive, affectionate scholar, brother of Mrs. Sarah Alden Ripley. On November 11th, Mr. Emerson wrote as follows to him. Dear George, I hope you do not need to be reminded that we rely on you at 2 o'clock on Thanksgiving Day. Mr. Lincoln, in fixing the day, has, in some sort, bound himself to furnish good news and victories for it. If not, we must comfort each other with the good which already is and must be. Yours affectionately, R. W. Emerson. End note. After this is a French quotation, untranslated. Nationality. Come, for once get out of sight of the steeples of your town. Beecher at Exeter Hall is superb. His consciousness of power shown in his jocular good humor and entire presence of mind, the instant surrender of the English audience as soon as they have found a master. He steers the behemoth, sits astride his very snout, strokes his fur, tickles his ear, and rules him. Secures the English by the method of circumstantiality, of statement, which they love, by figures, and then by downright homely illustration of important statements. His compliment to Wendell Phillips as the first orator of the world, did he not say so? Recalls Byron's line. And Jura answers from his misty shroud, back to the joyous Alps that call to him aloud. They, the English, write better, but we read more out of their books than they do. They have better blowpipe. We have not yet narrowed our heat to a focus, having a continent full of coal. England possesses drastic skill, always better artists than we. Carlyle a better writer, Gladstone or Bright a better debater, I suppose, than any of ours. Tennyson a better poet, but is the scope as high? Is the material of Tennyson better, or does not our dumb muse see stars and horizons they do not? In England, in France, and Germany is the popular sentiment as illuminated as here. As I wrote the other day, our native politics are ideal. These women, old wives sitting by the chimney side here, shrill their exclamations of impatience and indignation, shame on Mr. Seward, shame on the Senate, etc., for their want of humanity, of mere morality. They stand on the ground of simple morality, and not on the class feeling which narrows the perception of English, French, German people at home. We are affirmative. They live under obstructions and negations. England's 6 points of Chartism are still postponed. They have all been granted here to begin with. England has taken in more partners and stands better on its legs than once, but still has huge loads to carry. See how this moderates the ferocity incident elsewhere to political changes. We, in the midst of a great revolution, still enacting the sentiment of the Puritans and the dreams of young people 30 years ago. We, passing out of the old remainders of barbarism into pure Christianity and humanity, into freedom of thought, of religion, of speech, of suffrage, or political right, and working through this tremendous ordeal, which elsewhere went by beheadings, of massacre, and reigns of terror, passing through all this, and through states and territories, like asleep, and drinking our tea the while. 'Tis like a brick house moved from its old foundations and place, and passing through our streets, whilst all the family are pursuing their domestic work inside. I hate to have the egotism thrust in with such effrontery. This revolution is the work of no man, but the effervescence of nature. It never did not work. Yet nothing that has occurred but has been a surprise, and as much to the leaders as to the hindmost. And not an abolitionist, not an idealist can say without effrontery, I did it. It is the fly in the coach again. Go boost the globe, or scotch the globe to accelerate or retard it in its orb. It is elemental, it is the old eternal gravitations. Beware of the giving and of the recoil. Who knows or has computed the periods? A little earlier and you would have been burned or crazed. A little later you are unnecessary. If I had attempted in 1806 what I performed in 1807, said Napoleon, I'd have been lost. Fremont was superseded in 1861 for what his superseders are achieving in 1863, and many the like examples. The Republicans of this year were the Whigs and Democrats of 1856. Mazzini and Kossuth, 'tis fine for them to sit in committee in London and hope to direct revolution in Italy, Hungary, and Poland. Committees don't manage revolutions. A revolution is a volcano, and from under everybody's feet flings its sheet of fire into the sky. More than that, let not the old thinker flatter himself. You may have your hour at 30, says Jove, and lay for a moment your hand on the helm, but not at 60. I draft only between the ages of 20 and 45. Only Quincy Adams and a whole generation of men do I allow to lay an iron hand on the helm at 75. Our civilization and these ideas are reducing the earth to a brain. See how by telegraph and steam the earth is anthropized, has an occiput and a fist that will knock down an empire. What a chemistry in her magazine. How all magnifies New England and Massachusetts. A said, her ice burns more than others' fire. I will tell you why I value Boston, because when I go to enumerate its excellent names, I do not take down the Boston Directory, but the national history to find them. The rebels in the effrontery with which in their failing fortunes they adhere to in their audacious terms of peace have well instructed us. and I rejoice to see we are likely to plant ourselves with vigor on the condition of absolute emancipation as the first point with which each rebel state must comply. Their women, too, have taught our women, who have excellently learned the lesson. It will go hard, but we shall better the instruction. Remarkable letter of J. M. Botts to the Richmond Examiner in the Journal, saying that every man in the Confederacy regrets this moment the rebellion, and if the work were to do again, would not do it. Friendship a better base for treating of the soul than immortality. Then it affirms it inclusively. Then there is a untranslated French quotation. One thought fills immensity. Blake. The tigers of wrath are wiser than the horses of instruction. Blake. Then there is another French quotation. Speech I should have made November 22nd. The country wants men. No want of men in the railroad cars, in Brighton Market, in the city, in Washington Street, men to see Booth, to see Cuba, to see the great organ, to fill Faneuil Hall. Everywhere hosts of men. And the swarming population, the drain of the army, and all the loss by war is a drop in the bucket. But the country wants them, wants everybody. To be sure, there are many that should not go, those exempted by age, by infirmity, so held by peremptory engagements to their civil, domestic, or professional affairs, as that the loss of them out of these would be the greatest disaster. But for the multitude of young, able men, there is not this necessity to stay. Let them go. One omen is good, to fight for one's country. Every kind of man is wanted, every talent, every virtue. The artillerist, the horseman, sharpshooter, engineer, secret service man, carpenter, teamster, clerk. The good, to be the soul and religion of the camp. The bad, because to fight and die for one's country not covers, but atones for, a multitude of sins. And what? Will you send them to die with Winthrop, Lowell, Dwight, Shaw, Bowditch? Yes, when I consider what they have sealed and saved. Freedom for the world, yes, 1,000 times yes. Young, they were old, had only crowded 80 into 30. It was well worth the inestimable sacrifice, or to blot out one generation were well. The war is an exceptional struggle in which the first combatants are met, the highest principles against the worst. What a teacher! What a field! What results! Now I well know how grave and searching this ordeal is, how it has taught courage, anxiety of the youth, sensible, tender, from school, college, counting room, with no experience beyond football game or schoolyard quarrel, now to leap on a battery or a rank of bayonets. He says, I know not how it will be with me. One thing is certain. I can well die. Oh yes, but I cannot afford to misbehave. Dearest friends will know tomorrow, as the whole earth will know, whether I have kept faith with them. But the experience is uniform, that the gentle soul makes the firm hero after all. The record of the troops on the whole is nobly honorable through the war, and lastly the encouragements from the prodigious results already secured. Culture. Most people are not finished men, but sketches merely, and this for not finding their native bias. New York, December 22nd. The muskrat on our rivers has 2 doors, one to the water and one to the land. Our Boston merchants have already a sea door, but they are rather pinched by the Hoosic Mountain on the land side, and they want a land door, so they have made an extension of their gallery to New York and to build their land door here in New York, facing St. Louis and Chicago and the Pacific Railroad. Art. I must remember Leonardo da Vinci as a mannered artist when I recall that one face which in all his St. Johns or Madonnas looked out on me, as I once heard of Newton that some Sally Sullivan was in all his pictures, and of Greenall that he carved himself into his sculptures. I saw in his Medora his own face, and in his Achilles, I think, his form. Dr. Johnson, Carlyle, and John Wilson in Moss Side, etc., are victims of their own manner. Parmigiano is mannered. His figures attitudinize as in second-class society at watering places. Martin is mannered. You can tell his pictures at a look. In reply to the vulgar opinion of English and other savants that we must accumulate facts and distrust theory, I like well the sentences of Saint Beuve, and of course they are in French. Renan writes, Vie de Jesus. Many of his contemporaries have no doubt projected the same theme. When I wrote Representative Men, I felt that Jesus was the representative man whom I ought to sketch, but the task required great gifts, steadiest insight, and perfect temper, else the consciousness of want of sympathy in the audience would make one petulant or sore in spite of himself. Theodore Parker, of course, wished to write this book, so did Maria Child in her Book of Religions, and Miss Cobb and Alcott, and I know not how many more. In town, a stout soldier, an Irishman, walked before me, large, and with all too much motion. A little boy stopped him. Please give me a cent. The soldier stooped to find out what he said, and then, with unfeigned astonishment, said, A cent? Great God! I give you a cent, and rushed indignantly forward. This is the end of Emerson's journal collection number 54, dating from the year 1863, when the author was 60 years old. Thank you for listening.